How are you finding him? The report I got right away at the beginning from Robert Fitch down here is that he's awful. After Kant, after all, after Kant, if somebody's awful, then it sounds strange. I would think after Kant everything would be easy. But I suggested to Bob that the difficulty is not the translation. He was blaming it on the translation. I think the difficulty is rather the mode of thought. Oh, somewhat vocabulary, but you get used to that. But the mode of thought. You see, Kant was still involved in what nowadays has become known as linear thinking, tracing out a line of argument, trying to identify the underlying presuppositions or the transcendental presuppositions, those hidden concepts. And then in the dialectic, he's simply examining the logic of the argument and finding where there are non sequiturs. And you're accustomed to that sort of thing. What he's using is basically Aristotelian logic engaged in linear inference, step by step. And so you can follow step by step. But that's not Hegel, you see. Hegel is more like diving into a pool and trying to get your bearings. And I mean that because it's sort of like a pool in which you've lost sight of the perimeter. You're trying to get some sense of what's in this direction, what's in that direction. You're trying to locate yourself. But to do so, you have to find points of reference in all sorts of different directions. And so it's as if what Hegel is doing is landing plump in the middle of something and sending off feelers in all directions, vectors, to try and locate himself in relationship to other things in the environment. So it's a different kind of reading experience. Putting it more formally, tying it back into what we were saying last time, Kant is engaged in deductive thinking, tracing the logical connection between propositions. His is a logic of propositions and of the logical inference from one proposition to another. Hegel is not dealing with propositions. He's dealing with concepts. He's analyzing concepts, unpacking concepts. It's a different ballgame. That's mixing the metaphors after being in the pool. but it's a different mode of thinking. You see, that grand layout of his system, which I gave you in outline form with all of the 1, 2, 3, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You see, all of it begins with the most abstract conception, being. Everything else is trying to explore the concept of being, make it more concrete. Yeah. What do you mean? Being. You see? Oh, it's as if Kant has told us that existence, being, is not a predicate, it's not a concept. To which Hegel responds, that's what you think. I'll show you. And oh boy, it takes him a whole book to show us. And then some. You see? The bare fact of existence, no, that may not be being, it's just given, that is. That bare factuality. Fact without meaning. Existence without essence. But you don't find that in Hegel, you see. Hegel, as I intimated last time, is much more back into the Greek ethos in that regard, you see. Because the concept of being is loaded with all sorts of implications, and he's trying to unravel them, unpack them. How do you get inside a concept? Well, his way to get inside it is to sort of meander, asking himself, well, in this sort of free-floating mode of reflection, if I say being, what comes to your mind? Huh? Yeah. Non-being. To be or not to be, that's the question, isn't it? Whether it is better to, you know, being, non-being, is or it is not. Well, is it that way? Because if you ask whether somebody is or is not, in what respect do you mean? At what time do you mean? And immediately you begin to see that being and non-being, while they seem to be like antitheses, either or, mutually contradictory, they sort of combine when you think of becoming. Because in anything that's in process of becoming, it is what it was not, and it is not what it was, you see? It is what it is not quite yet, but it is that almost. You see, there's no such thing as static being in a world of change. And so you realize that what is not is just about to be is. And what is about to be is not. This is the nature of becoming, which is the concrete conception of being. And so what he's doing is trying to make that a little bit more concrete. And then you have the outline there. He moves on through other dimensions of the concept of being, not just affirmative or negative, but how much, quantity, all, some, so forth. But then from existence to essence. Yeah, because while on the surface, in a static kind of logic, it looks as if essence and existence stand over against each other, the bare fact of what, the bare fact that it is, as distinct from what it is, existence, you might say, precedes essence. That's what Sartre is going to say. You see, and Sartre is breaking with Hegel. Because for Hegel, there's no existence without essence. So that while the two concepts in the abstract stand over against each other as opposites, in concrete reality, they come together. You see. And so he has to move in his logic to the real concept of being. Notice he says the concept. Yes, being is a concept, not an empty, meaningless fact, but a meaning-laden concept, you see. And so he works on in that way. So this is the mode of thought, you see, Bob. And if you keep this in mind as you read, then you come a lot closer to what he's doing. And we'll get some illustrations of this as we go along. But for the moment, let me just, if I can find it, read you one short snatch from his logic, from the section on essence. And I think you can see what he's doing here. Says he, in the doctrine of contradictory concepts, one notion, say blue, stands over against the other notion, not blue. This other would not be an affirmative like yellow, but merely kept in the abstract negative, not blue. The negative in its own nature is something quite positive. But the inane opposition, inane is his word, the inane opposition between what are called contradictory notions is fully exhibited in the grandiose formula of a general law, that everything which has the one and not the other of all predicates which are in such opposition. In this way, everything is either blue or not blue. You're either blue or not blue, white or not white, yellow or not white. Informative, isn't it? You know, it's empty, it's inane. It doesn't tell you anything. It's forgotten that identity and opposition are themselves opposed, and that there is the principle of contradiction. But in contrast to this doctrine of contradictories, he talks about the conception of polarity. So that, if you like, being and non-being are at the two poles of a continuum, you'll see. And by implication, this is a much more correct definition of opposition on the polarity. And he therefore talks of a whole variety of polarities, not only being and non-being, but finite and infinite, ideal and real, one and many, universal and particular, appearance and reality, reason and reality. You see, these stand in the static logic as antitheses. But in reality, everything partakes in both of every polarity. Well, we see that in Hegel. Right after break, we'll be reading Whitehead. And I'll draw your attention to this again, because in the preface to his major work, Process and Reality, he says that he is very much influenced by F.H. Bradley, the British Hegelian, in rejecting all of these polarities. So keep in mind then that the Whitehead you're going to be reading is, like Hegel, rejecting these polarities and working with something of a dialectic. Now the big difference is that he's not a metaphysical